This presentation addresses various topics: sexual harassment, criminal law, and sexual abuse. Teenagers often assume I'm just a kid, right? The law can't touch me. You will see that your age does not keep you from having to pay the price for inappropriate sexual activity. Victims of sexual abuse are protected by special laws. Sexual harassment is unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Unreasonably interferes with an individual's life, including schoolwork performance, due to an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. If these behaviors make the victim unable to do well in school, make them unable to concentrate, and force the person to avoid certain classes or places where they see the harasser would be committing sexual harassment. Sexual harassment occurs if the behaviors may create an environment where the girl or boy feels uncomfortable. They may not want to come to school anymore. Others who witness the harassment may begin to feel uncomfortable also. If someone makes an unwelcome comment or does something sexually suggestive, it is a form of sexual harassment. Tell the person to stop because that comment or action was offensive. If they do it again, report them to a teacher, counselor, administrator, or trusted adult. This slide contains numerous examples of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment can be verbal, nonverbal, or physical. An example of nonverbal harassment would be if someone made inappropriate hand gestures as another student walked into the room. The person doing the harassing and the victim do not have to agree that harassment is occurring. For example, the person doing the inappropriate hand gestures may say that they were only joking. But if the victim feels uncomfortable, embarrassed, or threatened, then it may be a case of harassment if the behavior has occurred more than once. Notice that harassment can occur via computers and cell phones and other modern technology. Is this sexual harassment? A boy you know keeps leaving love letters with suggestive sexual content in your locker. You have told him to leave you alone and that you are not interested in him. However, he continues to leave the letters even though you told him to stop. Yes, the boy is harassing you with sexually explicit comments in the form of letters. This is an unwelcome repeated behavior. What would you do if you were in this situation? If she tells him to stop and he doesn't, she should tell her parents or a trusted adult. School officials should be told so that they can handle the situation. She might want to write down each time she received a letter from him and keep the letters. Would it be hard for you to have to tell someone about harassment? Why? Remember, a victim of harassment often feels embarrassed or ashamed. You can control your behavior. You can't control another person's behavior. You have the right to go to school in a comfortable environment free from harassment. If you don't tell, no one can help make it stop. In the example we discussed, a boy was harassing a girl. Girls can also be guilty of harassing boys. Both situations are equally wrong. If you've been sexually harassed, tell the individual to stop. If they do not stop, report it. No one has the right to sexually harass you. Criminal laws address such acts as public lewdness, indecent exposure, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, and indecency with a child. We will discuss these offenses during this presentation. Laws are in place to protect citizens. Be aware that your age does not protect you from being punished under the law. Consequences for sexual crimes range from curfew to jail to even prison time. Age of consent. The age of consent is the age at which state law says you are old enough to make the decision whether or not to have sex. Although some teens think they are ready to have sex, the law may say differently depending on your age and your state. For example, in Texas, you must be 17 years of age to legally consent to sex, while in California, it is 18. Laws regarding sexual consent are meant to protect children and adolescents. Many states set limits on the age difference between sexual partners when at least one is a minor. For example, in Texas, there is the 3-year rule. If there is a greater than a 3-year difference in age between the minor and the person they are having sex with, this is against the law. For example, if a 15-year-old is having sex with a 19-year-old, this is illegal in Texas. According to Florida law, a person 24 years of age or older who engages in sexual activity with a person 17 years of age or younger commits a felony. You may think that having sex means vaginal intercourse only. In the legal system, this is not the case. Sexual contact is the intentional touching of the anus, breasts, or genitals with intent to arouse or gratify sexual desire. The definition may vary slightly from state to state. So while sexual intercourse is a type of sexual activity, the term sexual contact refers to many other behaviors as well. Do you know the definition of sexual contact in your state? Running into someone on the basketball court or accidentally bumping into someone while trying to get to your locker is not considered sexual contact. However, if you intentionally touch someone's genitals or breasts, that is considered sexual contact. For example, you could get in trouble with the law for purposely touching someone on the breast or butt while they walk down the hall at school. Sex is sex. Rather than having vaginal sex, some teens engage in other types of sexual activities to try to avoid pregnancy, and because they believe they are still technically virgins. They do not think these acts are actually having sex. You need to know that the law considers these as sexual acts and that the same legal consequences can apply to these activities as to vaginal sex. Do you remember the definitions of all these types of sexual activity? Crimes involve the person committing the crime and those who are affected by the crime. For sexual offenses, they are often referred to as the perpetrator and the victim. So, what happens if you break the law regarding sexual contact? Depending on what happened, you could be charged with a misdemeanor or felony. A misdemeanor is a crime less serious than a felony, but there are still consequences. A felony is a serious crime for which the consequences can be imprisonment. Disorderly conduct is defined as the making of an offensive gesture or display that disturbs the peace in a public place. As a joke, a person exposes themselves by mooning a crowd. Since there is no intent to arouse, they could be charged with the crime of disorderly conduct. Indecent exposure is exposing your genitals with the intent to arouse. An example would be a boy who unzips his pants and exposes his penis to a group of girls in order to arouse himself or the girls. Public lewdness is any sexual offense committed in a public place or while being reckless about exposure. For example, if a couple has sex in the back of a car in a public park, they could be charged with public lewdness. If a person views a pornographic DVD or magazine in a public place such as an airport, this could be considered public lewdness. Sexual conduct is not legal in public. Committing these offenses could result in jail time for adults and probation or jail for juveniles. Indecency with a child, sexual assault, and aggravated sexual assault are all examples of offenses that are classified as felonies. Felonies are more serious crimes than misdemeanors and have harsher consequences. Let's look at each of these offenses in more detail. Any type of sexual assault with a child is a felony offense called indecency with a child. For example, a 14-year-old girl and a 19-year-old boy are making out and they both agree to have sex. Even though the act was not forced on the girl, the law will not recognize her as legally able to consent. The boy could be charged with indecency with a child by contact. Earlier, we talked about the misdemeanor offense of indecent exposure or flashing. If a child under the age of 17 is present, that misdemeanor may become a felony. For example, if a person exposed their genitals to a group of neighborhood children, they would be accused and prosecuted for their indecency with a child by exposure. Specific ages of the child or adolescent will with whom someone has sexual contact or indecent exposure is determined by each state. Sexual assault is commonly known as rape. Sexual assault is any genital, oral, or anal penetration by a part of the body or object without the victim's consent or doing those things to someone under the legal age of consent. Remember, under the law, no one under the legal age of consent can legally consent to sexual activity. Therefore, even if that person says yes, the law says no. Just like with childhood sexual abuse, most sexual assaults are committed by someone the victim knows. An example of sexual assault would be the case of a 15-year-old boy and his 15-year-old girlfriend. They are on a date. The boy wants to have sex and the girl refuses. Despite her refusal, he forces her to have sexual intercourse. He has committed sexual assault, which is a felony. The girl, her parents, or the police could file charges accusing the boy of this crime. At 15, he could be tried as a juvenile and receive a 20-year sentence in the juvenile justice system, but be transferred to an adult prison as early as his 16th birthday to complete serving his sentence. Depending on the details of the crime and the state, he could be prosecuted as a juvenile or an adult and face prison time and a very large fine. Forcing sex on someone else is a serious crime no matter what your age. Sexual assault becomes aggravated sexual assault, commonly referred to as statutory rape, if the victim is very young or if the crime involves kidnapping, serious injury, threats, drugs, or a deadly weapon. Even hands can be considered deadly weapons. An example of aggravated sexual assault is if a guy puts drugs in a girl's drink to impair her ability to think and react so that he can have sex with her. Even if she's older than the legal age of consent, the drugs make the girl unable to legally consent to sexual activity, and the guy could be charged with a felony of aggravated sexual assault. Another example of aggravated sexual assault involves children or very young teens. Many states have specific ages for this type of crime. For example, in Texas, having sex with someone under the age of 14 is a serious felony, even if that person wanted to have sex. It does not matter. A 14-year-old is too young to have sex according to Texas law. It is very important that you are careful of what you drink, especially at parties. Drugs can easily be slipped into punch bowls or individual drinks. Don't go to parties that are not supervised by responsible adults. This slide has 3 examples of date rape drugs. They usually cause a person to appear extremely drunk, lose coordination, become very drowsy, and go into a deep sleep. This generally happens 20 to 30 minutes after drinking. The effects can last for several hours. After victims wake up, they usually can't remember what happened. When mixed with alcohol or other drugs, the effects of date rape drugs are magnified and can even lead to death. Possession or delivery of these date rape drugs is a felony. They are classified in the same way as cocaine, and the penalty range is determined by weight of the drug. These drugs are extremely dangerous. In addition to serving time in prison, people convicted of felony offenses can never legally own, possess, use, or transport a firearm of any kind, nor will they ever be allowed to hold public office. Both adults and juveniles convicted of felony offenses may be required to report that conviction on future job applications. A convicted felon may also lose licenses such as driving, hunting, fishing, and even professional certificates such as those for teaching, law, and medicine. Sentences are determined based on the level of the offense committed, the fact of the particular offense, and the criminal history of the offender. Often, the younger the victim, the more severe the punishment. Punishments can range from court costs to prison time and large fines. Often, a punishment will include several of these items. All crimes are different, and the punishment is designed to fit the crime. If someone commits a sexual offense that is classified as a felony, they will be required to register as a sex offender. Registering as a sex offender with local law enforcement agencies is mandatory for both adults and juveniles convicted of sexual offenses against children. A federal crime measure called Megan's Law requires all 50 states to inform the public of convicted sex offenders. The law considers public safety more important than the privacy rights of persons convicted of sexual offenses. If required to register as a sex offender, the person's picture and address may be published for community awareness and may even be posted on the internet. A judge can also assign other punishments, such as requiring a sex offender to post a large sign at his or her residence to alert neighbors that a sex offender lives at that address. While the internet provides an easy way to do research for schoolwork and talk with friends, it also allows pedophiles access to children. Sexual predators can now find victims through the internet. You may be surfing the web and accidentally come upon an unwanted sexual image or pornographic website. Or you may have received a sexual solicitation while on a social website from a sexual predator asking you to do something inappropriate. These predators target young people by posing as teenagers to obtain personal information about them. This exchange of information may lead to invitations to meet the pedophile. This is called an aggressive solicitation or invitation. You need to tell an adult immediately if this happens to you. The number of online pedophile cases is increasing every year, so report anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or you know is wrong. Never put or share personal information on a website that could identify exactly who you are and where you live. The internet is a huge component in all of our lives. Be aware that you are responsible for actions while on the internet, and you can be held liable for making sexual suggestions to a person under the age of consent. When online, be careful not to disclose personal information because you can put yourself at risk for victimization. In addition, never agree to meet someone you don't know. If someone tries to encourage you to do this, please discuss this with your parents or another trusted adult. In most states, teenagers who send or receive sexually explicit photographs by cell phones or computer, known as sexting, have risked felony child pornography charges and being listed on the sex offender registry for decades. There are real risks that sexually explicit pictures meant to be shared only with a friend or partner will make their way into the wide publication on the internet and into the hands of sexual predators. Teens assume they will not get prosecuted for sexual assault with someone in their own school, but there are cases of students prosecuted and sentenced for sexual assault. Consider these 2 cases where teens were sentenced to prison for consensual, the girl said, okay, sex. In Texas, a young man had sex with a girl who said she was 16. She was actually 12. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison. 60. In Georgia, a 15-year-old girl engaged in oral sex with a 17-year-old boy. He was convicted of a felony and spent 2 years in prison. You're the expert, true or false? Sexual assault usually happens when someone is walking down a dark street by themselves. Actually, that is false. Sexual assault usually happens at the victim or the perpetrator's home. True or false? Rapists are easy to spot in a crowd because they look eerie. That is false. Most rapists appear to be no different than anyone else. They can be young, married, and appear normal. They can be of any race, color, or economic class. True or false? It's not rape if it's your boyfriend and he spends a lot of money on you. Oh my God. False. Doesn't matter who it is, and it doesn't matter how much they spend on you. No one has the right to expect sex from you. No one. True or false? Most people who are raped report it and get help. That is also false. Most victims of sexual assault do not report it and do not get help. True or false? If a girl says yes, it's not rape. After all, she did say yes. This is false. If a person is under the age of consent or under the influence of drugs or alcohol by law, they cannot legally consent to sex. Making good decisions about your sexual conduct will help you avoid the legal ramifications you could face. Offenses committed when you are young can follow you far into adulthood. It is important that you understand the laws. There are serious legal consequences for sexual offenses. Having sex as a preteen or young teenager can result in serious medical and emotional problems. That's why all states have laws to protect you. If someone is having sex with you, they may be committing a serious crime. Most 8th graders are 13 or 14 years of age, which is too young to have sex in most states. The person having sex with you may be committing a serious offense. It's important to set sexual limits before you start dating. Remember that the further you go, the greater the likelihood you will eventually have sex. Not only vaginal, oral, anal, and outer course are sex and can spread STDs. They are also likely to lead to vaginal intercourse. So before getting into a situation that could be sexual, identify the kind of touching you're comfortable with. Then let these limits be your guide as you begin any relationship and are faced with sexual situations. It is important to communicate these limits to your date, partner, and friends. Don't assume they know your wishes. You have the right to change these limits at any time. Develop relationships with people who treat you with kindness and respect. Select activities and locations that are safe and where trusted adults are available. Choosing abstinence helps you avoid many of these concerns and worries. Protect yourself by avoiding vulnerable situations, not giving in to negative peer pressure, not maintaining loyalties to friends who get into illegal situations, and always thinking of your future when making decisions today. Another thing to avoid is relying on the media to set an example for you. Pop culture is sexually saturated, and that is important for you and your parent guardians to establish your own set of sexual limits without being influenced by what you see in videos or TV or movies. The media and advertisers do not necessarily want what is best for you. They will not come to your aid if you contract an STD because you followed a bad example, which some have put forth in their magazines, DVDs, etc. Some people may have distorted expectations that in certain situations they are entitled to sex. They may think if someone flirts with them, leads them on, or they've spent money on them, that it is okay to expect or force sex. You need to realize that you never owe anyone sex for any reason, and you always have the right to say no to any form of sexual activity at any time and any place. Sex should be a respectful act mutually agreed upon by two adults who can legally consent. If someone says no, they mean no. Pressuring someone to have sex shows how much you don't respect that person. Forced sex is always against the law. It is never your fault if you are abused or forced to have sex. No one has the right to touch your private areas or make you participate in any type of sexual activity. If an adult asks you to keep a secret about touching you in a way that makes you uncomfortable, you need to tell someone you trust. If a friend or a date forces you to have sex, you need to tell someone. It takes courage to tell someone about bad things that are happening to you, and you might not be ready to tell someone right away. There are many adults around who want to help you. Find someone you feel comfortable telling, and as soon as you're ready, report the abuse. Try telling a parent first. If that is not possible, you can report the abuse to a teacher, counselor, nurse, doctor, coach, or minister. If the first person you tell doesn't believe you, tell someone else. Keep telling until someone believes you. Many times, sex offenders abuse more than one time and more than one person. To protect yourself and others, it is important to tell someone about the abuse. Having sexual urges is normal at your age, but exhibiting self control is a definite sign that you're maturing. When it comes to sexual activity, stop when you feel pressured, think about the consequences, and then go ahead and make the mature, healthy decision to choose abstinence. Always remember that you are worth the wait.